I'm back, everybody, and would you look at that? It's not another challenge video. So many of you were scared that I just keep making them until the heat death of the universe. I told you I didn't forget about you. Come on, y'all should know me better than that by now. I'm insulted. Anyway, it's been long enough since I did one of these. I'm not gonna waste any more of y'all's time. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, comment, share, and join the membership to get videos early. Now let's get started. Now, first up on the list, we have Ant from Image Comics. And the really interesting thing about this comic, other than that ass, because my God, who drew this, is that for a very large part of it, you don't actually know if Ant really exists. Hannah Washington is the main character of the comic, and she's Ant. And the comic flashes back and forth between her childhood, teenage years, and adulthood. And it's made very clear that as a child, she went through all sorts of trauma. And as a reaction to this trauma, she started writing in a journal or a diary or whatever the fuck you want to call it, where she created this superhero known as Ant. This was a way for her to deal with all of her trauma. And as an adult, it didn't really work. She has all kind of mental illnesses that basically revolve around her memory and her inability to actually have it. A lot of times she'll forget her name. She'll black out at random points. She forgets huge chunks of time. And sometimes her mind will just fabricate memories that just straight up never happened. And the comic really likes to fuck with your head, much like the story is actually fucking with Hannah's head, by basically making you question whether or not any of this shit is actually happening. Is she really the Ant, or does she just think she's the Ant because she created this persona as a child and has carried it with her all the way to her adulthood? Sometimes things will happen in the comic that can't possibly happen because they conflict with other things that happen. Sometimes Hannah as a small child will tell a story that happens with the Ant just for us to see it actually happen when she's an adult, making us question, did it really happen? Or is this just Hannah's imagination playing out in something that she thinks she did? On top of that, they throw in other questions like, does her power come from the government, and is the government benefiting from the fact that she's insane and trying to make her not believe the things that are happening? It's a whole thing, and the story constantly makes you guess and question exactly what's going on, what's real, and what's not. And if you really like asses, and if you really like superhero stories, but you're looking for something just a little bit different than the usual person gets a power and then uses it to save the day kind of thing, this is that story, but with a bit of an interesting twist that you might actually like. So, you know, pick it up for the story. Just that story. Look at that story. All right, next up we have Darkchylde from Image Comics. Again, you know, originally Image didn't own any of these motherfuckers. Did they just fucking go out and buy every independent comic book company that exists? I originally believed that this list was far more diverse than it's turning out to be. That it is what it is. Anyway, Darkchylde is the daughter of a human woman and then some weird nightmare demon thing that transformed into a human and fucked her mom. Due to this, Darkchylde became the key between the human realm and the nightmare realm where her father's from. One day she was fucking around doing some shit she wasn't supposed to do, and she opened up a portal to the nightmare realm, and a bunch of monsters run in and start attacking her little small town she lives in. She then realized that she has the powers of the nightmare realm. Essentially, any nightmare that she has, she can then pull that nightmare into the real world. Usually this takes the form of her shape-shifting into some like horrible abomination, but she can also summon creatures and shit from it too. She has the power of nightmares. And the story is about her using these powers to defend her town from these weird nightmare Cthulhu monsters that she summoned upon it. There's two selling points to this comic. One, which is the obvious one and probably the one they'd sell the comic on, it has a very horror lean. A lot of the monsters look very weird and trippy, and when they go into the nightmare realm, that looks very weird and trippy, and it's all very horror-esque. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's a horror comic. It's definitely like an action superhero comic, but it definitely has a horror leaning. Think something like the Swamp Thing comics or some of the older Doctor Strange comics that leaned a little more into horror. The other thing that I actually find pretty interesting, because it's very, very rare, is that she's a superhero that defends a small town. Every single superhero in the history of the universe, for whatever reason, protects a major city. Every single one. This is the only superhero that I can think of off the top of my head that actually defends a small town of people. That is very unusual for a superhero comic. And yeah, I know it makes sense. Cities often have a lot more crime than small towns, and a lot of these comic book companies actually exist in major cities, so they're just writing what they know. Life in a major city. Now, you'd think this is a pretty small change, but it's really not. The whole vibe of the comic is different. It's not just a moving of locations. The actual storytelling has to change to adjust to the difference between life in a major city and life in this small town where she knows everybody. There is a much greater connection between Darkchylde and the people that she's saving because she knows all of them. That's not usually the case for Spider-Man. He saves someone, and that's it. You never see him again. When Darkchylde saves someone, it's usually someone they went to high school with, or the guy who owns a local diner, or the sheriff that's known her since she was a child. And it's just kind of nice, and it gives leeway to the horrifying shit that you have to look at the whole time you're reading this book. Which, by the way, I'm not complaining. I always love me some horrifying shit. Next up, we have Purgatori, also known as the Purgs. Nobody calls her that. I just made that up. Coming all the way from Chaos Comics. And if you've been watching this series for a while, you know that I like me some Chaos Comics. I enjoy their complete inability to give a shit about anybody else's opinion. They just write whatever the fuck they want to write, as sexualized or violent or over the top as they want. And sometimes it's just fun to read shit like that. Purgatori was an Egyptian slave and devil worshiper who was a lover to the pharaoh's wife. As you can imagine, this pissed the pharaoh off quite a bit, and he wanted to have her executed. So she escaped, and then the story goes down this crazy rabbit hole of strangeness until she eventually becomes a demon, going as far to even becoming the lover of Lucifer herself and considered the queen of hell. That didn't last forever though, and nowadays she's just sort of doing her own thing, completely separate from the Prince of Darkness. The thing that separates Purgatori from other chaos baddies like Lady Death and Hell Witch is the fact that she's not the warrior type like they are. You can actually probably describe her as rather cowardly. She doesn't actually like fighting. Now be clear, I didn't say she doesn't like violence. I said she doesn't like fighting. Her powers revolve around illusion magic and deceiving people. She is the ex-wife of the Lord of Lies after all. And for several years she played a villain to Lady Death character, basically just being a gender-bent super hot devil character, before eventually becoming so popular that she got her own spin-off series. And that's been going strong ever since. There really isn't a whole lot for me to say about the comic other than that if you've seen these other parts. It's a chaos comic. It's sexy, violent, and doesn't give a fuck about what offends you. It just does whatever the fuck it wants. And we're up to part 7 on this video series. If you've seen the other ones and seen some of the other chaos comic characters that I've talked about, she has crossovers with basically all of them. For a long time there, she was the most popular villain character of Chaos Comics. So if you like sexy demon bitches and wanting violence, check it out. Last up, we have White Widow, published by Absolute Comics. And I have no idea why people keep recommending me to do this one. I've gotten so many recommendations, but I really don't understand what it is you expect me to say. So just a caveat before I get started, White Widow is not that old of a comic series. It just came out in 2018. And it only has 2 or 3 comics released a year. To this day, there's only 22 issues to read. I think that's not a particularly large amount of story to go over. Most of the important shit about the character we just straight up don't know yet. So what do we know? Well, we know White Widow was just a regular college girl until her dad came in all shot up and then gave her this crazy serum shit that made her a superhero. He then bleeds out and dies, and then the whole story is about her fighting against this organization called the Group that killed her father, trying to find out what this serum is, where her mother is, why her father was shot, and basically just trying to solve the mystery. That's it. That's the whole story. We don't know anything else yet. I mean, look, admittedly, she's drawn really well, so I do kind of see why people are recommending her. But this series isn't just about a bunch of hot ladies being thrown up on the screen. I like to give substance to these things. And there's really just no substance here yet. Maybe I'll bring her character up in a couple of years when there's more to chew on. But as of right now, all you really have to know is basically what I just told you, and the fact that she is clearly very heavily inspired by Spider-Man comics. Her powers and overall look make that painfully obvious. I mean, she's basically Gwen Stacy if she turned into like Carnage or Venom. That's what her appearance is all about. She is said to have a symbiote injected into her, although admittedly this series does define symbiote correctly. Venom and Carnage aren't really symbiotes. They're just called that. So that's one point for White Widow for sure. But yeah, there's nothing really wrong with the comic other than the fact that it just doesn't come out with issues very quickly. And so far, it's a pretty decent mystery story with a superhero that has spider-themed powers. There, you happy? I did her. Now stop asking me about it. No exaggeration, for a character that absolutely no one has ever fucking heard of, I have been recommended her like at least 15, 20 times. Anyway, that's gonna be all for me. Hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to like, subscribe, and do all that shit I already said about at the beginning of the video. And always remember, y'all stay safe out there, you hear?